happened to get in. Cory Doctorow, special. Did they do a body gravity search?
You know, it's funny. We did end up in about 5 different searches at Heathrow, and they kept saying blame the TSA. So apparently the TSA has imposed like these kind of crazy rounds of searches. We were traveling with a 2-year-old, and they said we couldn't all be searched together. My wife had to go off on her own with the 2-year-old because the TSA says so. I have a feeling the TSA doesn't say so. I think that they're just kind of making it up as they go along. No, but really, no price is too high to pay for security either.
They're taking the time and effort and everything. And what'd you bring down there? A couple of questions that, is this the first time you've been to the Northwest?
It's not my first time in Seattle, it's my first time at Norwescon.
Okay. The questions, if you didn't hear, I actually walked around today and asked people for questions, and they came up with some really hard ones. So let's talk about, could you talk about your involvement with Boing Boing and how'd you get into it?
Sure. So Boing Boing, for those of you who don't know, is a website I co-edit. But it started off as a print magazine in the 80s. I actually used to sell it when I worked for the science fiction bookshop. And Mark Frauenfelder, who co-founded the magazine with his wife Carla, was an editor at Wired, and we were corresponding about some other stuff. I published some science fiction about yard sales, and he'd written some stuff for Wired Online about our yard sales, and we kind of struck up a friendship. And there was a kind of funny moment where everybody in the world wanted to know what Dean Kamen had invented. They knew that he'd invented this thing, codenamed Ginger, also called It, and then a lot of people said that it was going to revolutionize the world. Do you remember the world before the Segway? And no one knew what it was, but Mark, having been trained as an engineer, looked up Kamen's recent patent filings and found a picture of a Segway and put it on Boing Boing, and which he'd started as a kind of experiment when he was reviewing Blogger.com for the industry standard, and CNN put it on the news that night, and he went from like 40 readers to like 7,000. And he asked me if I wanted to hang around. He asked me if I wanted to co-edit, or rather guest edit, because he was leaving for Hawaii the next day for a couple of weeks holiday. And when he came back, he said, "Would you like to stick around?" And that's sort of how it all started. We invited a couple more writers who we knew from Wired in, and now we're up to, I think it's about 3 million readers.
Excellent. Let's see. Do you see any changes or innovations in e-publishing in the near future?
You know, the innovation I'm hoping for the most is to get an e-publishing. I actually think the gadgets are kind of irrelevant. I know that this is like a horrific thing to say if you're you know, supposed to be a technophile, but I think the gadgets are irrelevant, mostly because they become obsolete so quickly. I think the interesting thing is the ecosystem, right? It's the legal and technical framework that surrounds these things. So I've got, you know, logo programs on my Linux ThinkPad up in my room that I wrote in 1979 on my Apple II Plus. And I can do that because the ecosystem of all of those apps and all the things that run on them are kind of open. With ebooks, I think that the problem has been not so much the gadgets, there's some lovely hardware out there, but the ecosystem around every single ebook platform that I know of requires you to submit to a very... And the idea that we can't be owners of our books, that we have to be sharecroppers of books, to me, both as a reader and a writer, I find I find it like viscerally revolting. Like, it actually makes my gorge rise. So this is why I don't have a Kindle or an iPad or any of these other things. And you know, they'll tell you that it's the big, dumb, evil publishers who make them do it. But I went to Amazon with a book that was a New York Times bestseller, and I said, I want to put this in the Kindle store without DRM and without a EULA. And they said, well, we can't take the EULA off of it. And I said, well, how about this? How about if I just add some text to the beginning that says, notwithstanding anything you've agreed to, the terms on which you've acquired this book are don't violate copyright law. Right? That's all you need, right, to make something that respects copyright law. And they said no. Apple's got the same deal. So Audible, which is another Amazon division, agreed to let me do an audiobook without DRM. Apple said they wouldn't carry it in the iTunes store. So this has nothing to do with protecting copyrighted rights holders. This has to do with building roach motels where copyrighted works check in, they can't check out. Where you as readers are glued into the device and you can never leave without abandoning your collection. So that's what I think is important about ebooks. I want to see innovation in that side, in the policy side.
I have time for 2 more questions.
All right. I'll try to make the answer shorter.
Okay. No, you're doing great. With your years of experience in the internet security, has this affected your outlook on society as a whole?
I guess the thing that technical security, information security has really made me think hard about is Bruce Schneier's aphorism that the important thing about systems isn't how well they succeed, it's how well they fail. I think that we're seeing this today with the kind of rise of security theater and the war on terror, that a system I use this example in Little Brother, that if you had a system where you had a rifle over the security gate, actually, no, I think this is Bruce Schneier's example. You have a rifle over the security gate that detects terrorists, and it's 99% effective. So 99% of the time it correctly identifies terrorists. 1% of the time it's wrong, and it just shoots them in the head as they go through the security gate. Well, this succeeds very well, right? You have a bunch of dead terrorists at the end of the day. But it fails very poorly, because the likelihood of anyone being a terrorist is pretty low, say 1 in a million. If something's 99% effective, that means that 10,000 times out of a million it's going to be wrong, or 10,000 times for every time it's right, it's wrong. So the pile of bodies there, 9,999 of them are actually not terrorists, and one of them is. So this is a system that fails very badly. I think the Prius owners have just discovered what it means to have brakes that succeed well and fail badly. And I could build you a car that succeeded very well, but occasionally exploded, and save a lot of money on a lot of the features that go into building a car, and that would fail badly. I think that when we just you an automotive person, yeah. I think that when we think about security, we don't think enough about how it fails. We really only think about how it succeeds. And this leads you to this kind of inevitable system where you find yourself standing in front of a security guard who's saying something dumb like, "No, you can't get that kid out of the tree because of liability." This is a bad failure mode. So failure modes, I think, are the thing I think of.
Your final question is, being the famous blogger that you are, when was the last time this week